Saladin of Jerusalem. Now Jerusalem was in the hands of the Crusaders. The land all around the holy city was ruled by Crusader princes, but the Saracens wanted Jerusalem back. They organized themselves into an army and attacked one of the little kingdoms near Jerusalem, called Edessa. In 1144 they defeated its Crusader prince and took Edessa. When news of this revolt reached England, France and the other Christian countries, a new army of knights set out to fight the Saracens. We call this the Second Crusade. But the Second Crusade failed. The Crusader army couldn't retake that rebellious little kingdom. It remained in Muslim hands. The Crusader army fell apart, and the knights crept back home, ashamed of their failure. And the Saracens, under the great warrior Saladin, began to prepare for an even greater attack on Jerusalem itself. When Saladin was born, Jerusalem had been in the hands of the Crusaders for almost 40 years. And Saladin was just as anxious to win the city back for Islam as the Crusaders had been to conquer it for Christianity. From childhood on, he prepared himself to be a warrior. He spent years learning how to follow the Quran and training himself to fight. As a young man, he fought in the army commanded by his uncle. More and more Muslims noticed Saladin and praised his bravery. Finally, Saladin became the second in command, or vizier, over all the Muslims in Egypt. Now he had his own army, and he was determined to bring all the Muslims together into one powerful army with one goal: to retake the city of Jerusalem. But before he could do this, Saladin had to convince the Muslim warriors to follow him rather than any other Muslim leader. So he was careful to be a model Muslim. He never broke his word. He always prayed 5 times a day, even when he was traveling or fighting. He gave so many alms to the poor that his treasury was almost empty. He gained a reputation for justice and fairness. Saladin became more and more popular. At last he had gathered a huge and faithful army around him. In the year 1187, he was ready to march towards Jerusalem. When the Crusader ruler of Jerusalem, King Guy, heard that Saladin's army was approaching, he called all of his knights together to ask them for advice. "Saladin is marching towards us with a huge force of Saracens behind him," he said. "What should we do? Stay here in the city or go out to meet him?" The oldest and strongest knight said, "We should stay here and defend the city. It's too hot to march out across the plains. If we stay here, Saladin's armies will have to tire themselves out coming to us. And you remember how hard it was for us to conquer the city as long as the Saracens stayed inside it?" But another knight disagreed. "We should go out and meet this army," he shouted. "Staying here is cowardice. Let's be courageous and attack Saladin first." King Guy didn't know what to do, but he was afraid that the oldest and strongest knight was out to take the throne of Jerusalem away from him, so he decided to follow the second knight's advice instead. He collected all of his men together and marched out to meet Saladin and his army. That was a terrible mistake. The summer day was the hottest of the year. The sun poured down on the Crusaders. Their heavy steel armor heated up like frying pans on a stove. The rocks were too hot to touch. Dust choked the horses and made the men cough. They grew so weary and thirsty that King Guy ordered them to stop in the middle of the afternoon and set up camp near a well. So the Crusaders unloaded their horses, set up their tents, and hurried to draw water from the well. The well was dry. By now the Crusaders were sick from thirst, and even worse, they were down in a valley between 2 mountain peaks called the Horns of Hattin. An enemy army could hide behind the trees and rocks above the valley and shoot arrows down on them. But King Guy's army was too exhausted to move. They lay in their tents in the heat, barely able to reach for their weapons. Sure enough, Saladin's army surrounded the valley. The Saracens set fire to the brush and trees around the valley's edge, so that the Crusader army couldn't escape. But the Crusaders were so weak that they didn't put up much of a fight. They were defeated, and King Guy surrendered. Now Jerusalem was undefended, so Saladin led his army into the city in a triumphant parade. Saladin told his men not to kill the Christians in Jerusalem. Instead, he took them captive and sold them as slaves. But he allowed the weak and the elderly to go free. And after he declared himself the ruler of Jerusalem, he announced that Jewish and Christian pilgrims would be allowed to enter the city in peace. For 90 years, Jerusalem had been under Christian rule. Now it was in Muslim hands once again. A third crusade was launched to get Jerusalem back, but Saladin could not be defeated. After this, there were 5 more crusades. Each of the crusades tried to take a part of the Islamic empire away from the Muslims, but none of the crusades were very successful. Crusades weren't a very good way to win land back from the Islamic empire. El-Said and the reconquest of Spain. The most successful attack against the Islamic Empire wasn't a crusade and didn't take place in Jerusalem. Muslim armies kept control of Jerusalem, but over in Spain, Christian kingdoms pushed the Muslim rulers out. We call this time the reconquest of Spain. Do you remember reading about the Muslim invasion of Spain? 400 years before the Crusades, the Visigoths who lived in Spain had invited the Muslim warrior Tariq bin Zayed to come in and help them settle a fight over the Spanish throne. Tariq came with an army, and he took Spain for Islam. The Arabs lived in Spain for centuries. They became known as Moors, and their kingdom was called Al-Andalus. The Spanish language became full of Arabic words. Beautiful mosques were built in Spain. Moorish artists, musicians, poets, and philosophers became famous all through the world. Only a few small kingdoms in the north of Spain remained under the rule of Christian kings. For many years, the Muslim rulers of Al-Andalus were tolerant. They allowed Jews and Christians to live in Spain in peace. But 100 years before the Crusades began, a new Muslim king came to the throne of Al-Andalus, a king who was only 12. This young king didn't really know how to rule a country, so he left most of his decisions to his tutor. In the year 978, this tutor, Al-Mansur, became the king's vizier, his second in command. Al-Mansur didn't want Christians or Jews in Spain. He made new laws that kept Christians from meeting and worshipping together, and he declared that Christians and Jews would have to pay higher taxes than Muslims. So many Christians left Al-Andalus and traveled up to the north of Spain, to the Christian kingdoms where they would not have to worry about persecution. Now, all the Christians in Spain were gathered together in one place, and they began to think about fighting back against the Muslim kingdoms of Al-Andalus. They started to venture out from the north and attack Muslim cities. One by one, these cities began to fall to the Christian armies. One Christian fighter, Rodrigo Díaz de Vivar, became the greatest hero of the Reconquest. So many stories are told about him that we cannot be sure which are true and which are legends. But here is one account of Rodrigo's life. During the Reconquest, the Christian kingdom of Castile in the north of Spain hired the young warrior Rodrigo to lead its armies. Rodrigo fought so bravely that the king of Castile, Alfonso, grew jealous of him and banished him from Castile. Rodrigo knew that he had done nothing wrong. He swore that he would not shave or trim his beard until he was pardoned, and so his beard grew for years and years. It became so long that Rodrigo braided it and tied it into a knot so that no one could grab it and pull him down in battle. When Rodrigo left Castile, he traveled around Spain, fighting for whoever would hire him. He led Christian armies into battle against the Moors, and the Moors into battle against the Christians. Both sides grew to respect his strength. They called him simply El-Said. This means the Lord or the boss. El-Said eventually settled down in a small castle in the east of Spain, but he wouldn't be allowed to rest for long. Alfonso's kingdom, Castile, was growing more and more powerful, capturing more and more Muslim cities, and the Islamic rulers of Spain were afraid that they would not be able to fight the Christians off. So they sent a message to the Muslims of North Africa, asking for help. A huge army of Muslim warriors poured across the Strait of Gibraltar into Spain. They defeated the Castilian army and began to drive the Christians back into the north. The Christian attempt to reconquer Spain seemed doomed. King Alfonso realized that he needed his strongest general to come help him. So he sent messengers to Al-Said, begging the great warrior to fight against these invading armies. "Help us to fight against the Islamic forces," the king pleaded. "They have driven the Christians out of the city of Valencia and have filled it with Muslim warriors. If we cannot retake these cities, we are doomed." The city of Valencia was near Al-Said's castle, so he chose 4,000 fighters and led them out to attack the city. He rode ahead of them, his braided beard tucked carefully into his helmet, his armor gilded with gold and silver, and a scarlet dragon on his shield. The Muslim army in Valencia was much larger than Al-Said's small force, but Al-Said chose his battlefield carefully. It was a small field, surrounded by trees and rocks, with a narrow entrance, and only a small part of the Muslim army could get into it at a time. Little by little, Al-Said and his army defeated the forces of Valencia. In 1094, Al-Said claimed the city for his own and turned its mosque into a Christian church. Al-Said's triumph was not the last Christian victory. The tide of the war had turned against the Moorish forces. The Christian armies called their crusaders to come and help them drive the Moors from Spain. Eventually, 5 Christian kingdoms covered most of Spain. Only a small kingdom far to the south, Granada, remained in Muslim hands. Spain had been reconquered.